Hi, I'm Clare Pollard and welcome to Clare's Poetry Circle. Inspired by the lockdown, every Monday this autumn I'm uploading a short poetry workshop for beginners and a writing exercise, and I hope you'll join me. Do spread the word, do tell anyone else you think might enjoy it, press the subscribe button and feel free to join in and share your poems on Instagram or Twitter with the hashtag Clare's Poetry Circle or in the YouTube comments, and I'll try and read them all. This week, my reading recommendation is the magazine I edit, Modern Poetry in Translation, which was set up over 50 years ago by Daniel Weisbord and Ted Hughes, and it aims to showcase the best in world poetry. But it's okay, because I'm not showing off. This issue, the focus has been guest edited by the Dead Women's Poetry Society, and it focuses on all those amazing women poets who've been forgotten or written out of the canon through history. I just got my copies. It's a really special issue. Look at that, beautiful. It's always gorgeous. It's got lovely illustrations by Lily Arnold in it this time. I've even got the badge. So do buy a copy and check Modern Poetry Translation out, our website, and we're on social media. We'll be putting up some poems over the next few weeks. Now, we thought last week about the poetic I and the session before actually. And last week we also touched on the poetic you. We said dramatic monologues are usually addressed to a specific you, a specific person. But this week I want us to think about the poetic you a bit more and unpack it a bit more. Who is your audience? I want you to think about first of all. So who are you writing for and who are you writing to? And these are not necessarily the same thing. First of all, just think a little bit about your audience. Have a think, jot down, who do you imagine? Maybe no one. Maybe you just want your poems to stay in your drawer, like with your diary, and that's fine. Maybe for you it's like doing a crossword puzzle. It's just a fun hobby. You don't feel the need to show everyone your crossword puzzle when you finish it, right? It may be though that for you, you enjoy sharing your poems with a particular friend or a writers group or online with your friends and family or at a local open mic, and that's who you have in mind, and I think that can be really useful to have a real reader in mind. It may be that you're more ambitious and you hope one day to have your work published in magazines or as a book, in which case you have to imagine a wider audience for your work. Do you think you're speaking out of a certain set of experiences that isn't usually represented in poetry, maybe? So you have something new to add? Maybe you think there needs to be more disabled poets or working class poets, for example, so you're writing for those like you who are underrepresented. You might write because you're a total poetry fan and you write under the influence of and in response to other poets, and you want to be part of that big conversation. You might enjoy making people laugh, you might enjoy making people think. Who do you imagine as that reader who's going to pick up your book and read your words with pleasure? It's helpful to start to imagine that, especially for editing and finishing poems, when I think it is important to have an audience in mind. You're not just writing for yourself at the point you're starting to edit. Just on a basic level, you need to think, am I catching my reader's attention? Is the title interesting? Is the first line interesting? Or are they bored and they've put the poem down already? And then another basic question, am I giving the reader all the information they need to understand what's going on in this poem, for example? Now, secondly, the question is, who is the poem addressed to? This may be the same answer as the first. You might write poems for your girlfriend to read, and they are addressed to your girlfriend. But often the answers might be different. Now, not every I poem needs to directly address you. Many, of course, don't. But it's amazing how many of the great forms, the great literary forms, do address a you. Dramatic monologues usually address a you, as we said last week. But the sonnet, one of the great forms, almost always addresses a you, a beloved. It's a very intimate form, almost intrusive sometimes. We feel we're listening in on the sweet nothings of others. And the loved one in a sonnet is also often unobtainable, which makes sonnets even more voyeuristic in a way. We're listening to someone's rather desperate attempts at seduction. In the ghazal, a Persian form, or Arabic form, they're also often addressed to an unobtainable beloved, and some argue that beloved is a metaphor for God, so God is often addressed in those poems. In the lullaby, a baby in arms being rocked to sleep is usually addressed. In the elegy, a lost loved one is often addressed. In all those forms, there is a tension. You're addressing the love object, God, the baby, your lost ones, but are they listening? Probably not, or do they understand if they do? There's an interesting tension at the heart of all those forms, an intimacy, but also in those stanza breaks, a kind of palpable silence, so we're aware they're one-way conversations. And what about the ode? Well, let's talk about odes next. Ode comes from the Greek, meaning sing or to chant, and it can be generalised as a kind of address to an event, a person or a thing not present, and it's usually used to praise or to glorify. And the ode often addresses something that isn't human. Think of, you might have heard of Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, or Keats's To Autumn, which addresses autumn directly. Sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find thee sitting careless on a granary floor, thy hair soft lifted by the winnowing wind. Now what happens there is something we might call personification, another one of those terms you might recall from your O-level at GCSE. In order to talk to the non-human in human language, the poet necessarily kind of humanises them, we personify them. And that might not be a good thing, of course, in terms of humanity's relationship with nature, say, but it's an interesting poetic technique, making of the inhuman human. I got very interested in odes at one point. My book, Look, Clare, Look, actually has a whole sequence of odes called The World and I. Odes to pigeon, depression, absinthe, a Dartmoor pony, a London plane tree. I think, again, I was interested in that tension, speaking to something but knowing it's not going to answer or hear even. I like the idea of odes being praise poems too. Poetry's so often gloomy, isn't it? Mine certainly is. And if I'm being absolutely honest, my odes in this are absolutely miserable. But I like the idea of praise poems. People often say happiness writes white. It's hard to catch it on the page, but I like those poets who do celebrate the world, and odes can do that, are meant to do that. Now, just one more technical thing about an ode before I make you write one. The apostrophe. That's a term for an exclamatory figure of speech, that moment when a speaker or writer breaks off and directs speech to the person or abstraction or thing. And it's often introduced by the word O, not O-H-O, but just the letter O, a big O, capital O. Oh, pigeon, oh, rainbow, you are stunning. Oh, Sundays, how I love to wake in your tangle of cosy sheets. That's an apostrophe, that breaking off to address that O. So I'd like you to write an ode this week. I would like you to think about your audience, who you're writing for, and what might make them smile or amuse them or make them think. But also, as well as the audience, you have to think who or what the ode is addressed to. So what or who do you love? What do you want to celebrate? It could be something just fun, like an ode to Strictly Come Dancing, or jogging pants. I've just succumbed to the lockdown and bought my first pair in my adult life. An ode to biscuits, or just some celebrity you've got a crush on. It could be more ambiguous. It could be a poem that explores your love affair with alcohol or the iPad. There are some great modern odes out there. Neil Rawlinson has an ode I'm very fond of, an ode to piss, about that relief when you've been just hanging on. Sharon Olds has some great odes. One to a spoon that's online, I think, and an ode to her hymen, famously. Angel Nafis has one to shea butter. I've read ones recently in Poetry magazine, so that's always available online. To autocorrect and gossips. So it could be something ambiguous. It could be, you might genuinely want to capture the glory of something. It could be an ode to the river, the bird in your yard, to nurses or the scientists keeping us safe, to hope, to an abstraction. But key things here about this form: direct address. You're addressing your poem to the thing you love. You're speaking to it. and it's a praise poem. I want you to write a praise poem. And if you dare throw in an O, an apostrophe, that's great. Although I realise it can sound it might make you a bit self-conscious. You don't have to. It might sound a bit old-fashioned. Oh, Poetry Circle. Enjoy. I'm looking forward to seeing these poems of praise to brighten this month, and you can post them in the comments or hashtag Clare's Poetry Circle, and I'll see you next Monday.